Hey folks, welcome to another episode of There's Just Something About Kansas City, where we're in conversation about the people, places, and things that make this such a great place to live. And I couldn't get any better guy in here today to talk about this, and the things that he has experienced here is Dr. Matthew Naylor. We'll call him Matt from now on as he professes. He would rather have us call him, which is great. Makes it more casual. And he is the president and CEO, of course, of the WWI Museum and Memorial, which has been dominant in a bunch of the last few years with you in Union Station right across the street, with the tremendous crowds we've had and tremendous celebrations that we've had here in Kansas City. Welcome.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Matt, let's talk a little bit about your background. You have now been with the museum for 10 years, correct? You've been in the U.S. for 20.
Yep.
You are a native of Australia.
Yep.
Is it Perth? Is your hometown?
Grew up in Melbourne.
Oh, you grew up in Melbourne.
Yep.
Okay.
My wife grew up in Brisbane.
Okay.
But we met as teenagers in Melbourne. But we certainly lived in Perth about 7 years. Three of our children were born there. And but we last lived in Sydney.
Oh, okay. So you've lived all over that country. Yeah. That's a tremendous country. That's a great place, right?
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, they get tremendous tourism, and things are really, Australia is just one of those places you see there's a Sydney Harbor.
That's right.
And you see that shot all the time.
Yeah.
There's so much more to that country than there is.
Well, it's as big as the continental US in landmass, but only 25 million people.
Oh, gosh, with 300 million.
Yeah, that's right.
330 million,
So most of those live in major cities. It's one of the most urbanized countries in the world, despite the fact that there's so much land. But then outside of those cities, then there's just tremendous amount of space. And then, of course, it's an island as well as a continent. So there's a lot of beaches, a lot of coastlines. So that means you can find yourself on a beach with nobody else.
You know what? Yeah. That's pretty nice. In fact, the country's surrounded by beaches, as a matter of fact. So that's fantastic. So what was it like growing up in Australia?
Yeah, no, a great experience. We lived in a industrial area in Melbourne near Monash University in Clayton. But there was just 5 houses down a rubber factory, and next to that a printing factory. We used to play in the, get under the fence and play in those places. It was fairly low land, so there'd be lots of tadpoles and frogs that we'd collect. And then right next to that was the primary school, the elementary school that we attended. So I can't imagine now that there'd be a rubber factory, pumping out smoke, and then 2 doors down, literally 2 doors, was the elementary school. And then, but it was good. It was a nice neighborhood, and certainly a good experience. My father was an immigrant. My mother several generations living in Australia. And so we grew up in a working class family, lower middle class, had the opportunity to go to university and so forth, in fact, at Monash University, and then lots of opportunities since then.
Yeah, and your dad was an immigrant from where?
From the UK. He was a 10-pound pom. So after World War II, Australia had a big immigration program, and it particularly invited Europeans to move. Australia was, and continues to be, a racist country. It had a white Australia policy until the late 60s that only permitted primarily people of Caucasian descent to immigrate. And at that time, he had the opportunity to pay £10, and then he would be sponsored by a family and travel then to Australia, where he then, after some years as a printer, met my mother's brother, and then met who became then my mother.
Yes. Oh gosh, that's amazing. What a great story that is. And you wouldn't think about. I never thought about Australia from the racist standpoint. You think you're about South Africa all the time, obviously over there. But I never thought about that.
Yeah, not uncommon in the age for that to occur.
That was when it happened.
Indeed, and Australia has sought to make amends to that, especially the treatment of Indigenous Australians. There's been, I think, a really national focus on reconciliation and on recognition of the impact of colonialism, and continues to work toward being a reconciled country, and really made, I think, fantastic strides in that respect. There's a deep commitment, amongst the populace and with the governments, both conservative and progressive governments have an equal shared commitment to reconciliation with Indigenous Australians, which is, I think, a noble cause.
Yeah, right. And I think you reached out to the United States at one time or another for teachers. I think at one time, maybe in the 70s, at one time you'd offer, you come over here commit for 5 years. We'll send you back home for, twice a year or something. I remember seeing this because I'm sitting in San Francisco at this time, and I'm not getting to where I want to go in this business. Okay, so I'm looking at being a police officer maybe in San Francisco, taking the civil service exam, and then I started seeing these ads for Australia, and I sort of had a wanderlust all the time, and I'm going, Australia, boy, I bet that would be really interesting. But I remember, be a teacher, come over here, you sign a contract, and then we'll send you back home a couple of times a year, but you've got to commit to us for 5 years. Do you remember a lot of people from the United States immigrating over too?
Sure. And Australia is a land of immigrants.
Yes.
People are moving there all the time. And so there's been real drive sometimes to, get certain skill groups there, get different balances of seeking to be more open to people across the world. It's a merit-based system of immigration, so skills give you more points, and so they tend to focus on skills and abilities over family for immigration. So it's a different system than in the United States, but it served the country well. I think it's economically a really strong nation. It's a robust democracy. In the United States here, I choose not to participate in partisan politics, but in large measure because of my service at the National WWI Museum and Memorial. I don't want to be seen to be
political.
But I do. But I'm a U.S. citizen, and I take PTO on voting days, and I work as a poll worker, and that's part of my contribution to supporting the democratic process in the U.S. In Australia, voting is compulsory. If you don't vote, you're fined. So the irony is that it's compulsory democracy. So
you have to vote.
That's exactly
for
right.
somebody. Yeah,
exactly.
That's amazing. That's great. Plus, then you have you dove in too. I mean, you're a poll worker and you make sure you vote. You have taken. I wish we could get more of the people in this country to, instead of having 40% turnout, to have, if it was compulsory and you were going to get fined, I think we'd have a lot more people at the polls. I'd love to see how they got that passed, however, okay?
Surely.
That's the only thing, yeah. So you've been here. When did you first start to think about the United States?
Sure. We've always seen life as a bit of an adventure. You only get to do this thing once. And so we've sought to make life interesting. And we had the opportunity to be able to be in the US, where I was in the humanitarian sector and lead a humanitarian organization here. And, we thought, let's have that experience. And so, do you remember the ice storm in 2002? In February of 2002. Yeah. So we arrived here just days before. And we had the good fortune of being renting somebody's furnished home. They were in Arizona. They had the good sense to be in Arizona. That's exactly right. So we were there, and then the ice storm hit, and we were without power like most people in the metropolitan area for about 5 days. So we were thinking, okay, so we say we only get to do this thing once, let's make it an adventure. But we weren't sure that we wanted quite this adventure. And I remember the day after that the storm hit, I went out because I thought I really need to go to the office. I need to go to work. And so it took me about 45 minutes to chip away the ice around the lock of the door and then jam, be able to get the door open because it's completely covered in ice, and then chip the windshield so I could see through. So after like an hour of doing that, then I tried to make my way to the office. Well, what in the world was I thinking? Nobody, of course, is there.
Right. And nobody's coming.
No, and the roads are completely empty because they're covered in ice. And now, of course, I just look out the window and say, I'll forget that, I'll go back to bed. So, now, of course.
You become very Americanized.
That's right.
Now. Okay.
We'd now just log in and we'd work virtually, so it wouldn't be an issue at all. But, not knowing the culture, not knowing expectations then. But yes, the ice storm of 2002 was the defining, that's, what we remember. And in the daytime, it was so cold and we had no heating, of course, in the house. And then I'd come home. I did, in fact, after a day or two, get to going to the office and so forth. But we would then go to Lowe's and just wander around trying to stay warm, go to the Home Depot and just wander around because at least they were heated.
Okay, so how much of a serious discussion did you have right during that period of time? You had a lot of time to yourselves now.
Well, we knew
so you're sitting down there talking to each other.
Yeah, we knew it was going to be cold. So we knew that this would pass. It's all, it's it adds to the experience and toughens you up.
Gosh, yeah. Well, this weather will toughen you up a little bit.
Indeed.
Well, we'll put this. We have all 4 seasons.
That's exactly right.
So, we have the hot summers and the cold winters and the beautiful spring and falls, and we just sort of roll with the flow at that time. And I think it's part of the experience
of
this part of the country, being here in mid-America. This is it. Not everybody can get up and go to Arizona in the winter and then come back during the summer and the other months to live.
No, and it's an attitude that you adopt, isn't it? You
can
whine about what it's like, or you can, accept it, and it's not the hand you get dealt, but how you play the hand is how we view it.
And you did not come here. You've been with the museum for 10 years.
That's right.
Well, what did you do prior to that?
I was in the humanitarian sector, and I led an organization called Outreach International, which is now headquartered in 18th Street. A great organization, worked in a number of developing countries in comprehensive community development, really rewarding experience. Chose after being there 9 or 10 years to make a transition to the arts and cultural sector, and I was fortunate that Julian Zagazagoitia, the director at the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art, recruited me to lead external affairs there. And that was a fantastic experience. But I was only with him for probably less than 18 months, maybe about 15 months, when the search firm contacted me and wanted to talk to me about leadership at the National WWI Museum and Memorial. But, I wouldn't have been able to do the work that I do now at the Museum and Memorial if it were not for the time that I had at the Nelson Atkins, and remain very close to Julian and have many colleagues, friends, who I worked with at the Nelson Atkins. It was a enormously important time for me, and prepared me, really well to better understand the museum culture. And then I've been now 10 years since June of this year at the National WWI Museum and Memorial. Yeah,
and I don't think a lot of people in Kansas City, they know the Nelson Atkins and have gone for exhibits or whatever, and they know the shuttlecocks and the whole history, but I don't think they understand the impact that place has, that wonderful place has.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's a real jewel of the city, and we're very fortunate in Kansas City to be in a metropolitan area, of 2.5 million, something like that, to have the extraordinary cultural assets that we have. And, a centre, a key part of that is the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art, and it really goes to the early part of the 20th century, when the Nelson Atkins was formed, as was the National WWI Museum and Memorial. Union Station was built. Other civic assets were developing. That something I think sort of extraordinary was happening in Kansas City. That there was this sense of confidence amongst the people who lived here that they would be willing to develop these cultural assets, which have really served the city exceedingly well, and make it a reason to stay, but also a reason for people to move here as well. A city of this size to have all of those assets, quality sports teams, as well as lots of employment opportunities. And not every city experiences that. We're really fortunate.
Yeah, and when my wife has been trying to drag me into this for like the last 5 years. She's had this vision ever since talking to people, and every time you talk to somebody, you'll meet someone like yourself, or with Carl Peterson, or Tom Watson, or George Brett, or somebody like that on the sports side. And you could live anywhere in the world. I mean, Tom Watson won 5 British Opens, so he could live free in Scotland. Okay, they love him so much, and yet they all live here. And the one phrase they always use, there's just something about Kansas City. Yeah. And I think people who come here from the outside, I think, like yourself, like myself, I think we overlook that we look at it and say, yeah, there really is. But people who are native of here sometimes, they have that little bit of a chip on their shoulder. I'm interested to get, they think, well, St. Louis, or Chicago, or Dallas, or, Los Angeles or New York, or you know what? I think we have as much to offer, more to offer a lot of times than those major cities do.
No, I agree with you. Colleagues on the east coast of the US, at least until before the pandemic, when they were every day commuting to work,
Yeah.
some of those colleagues, they would have 2-hour commutes, an hour and a half, 2 hours, 2 or 3 modes of transport. And and that's true of many cities everywhere in the world. My commute in Sydney was about an hour. I remember a friend who used to live in Chicago saying to me, "Matt, the traffic here, it's just driving me nuts." I said, "Lauren, you've been out of Chicago for too long. Well, yeah, we do have peak hour, but we don't really have peak hour.
No, we
just
don't.
Cast back to when you lived in Chicago." And so we're really fortunate that to have all of what we do here easy to get around, a reasonable cost of living, good educational opportunities in the most part. Still with, same sorts of issues that other cities deal with, the other side of the coin. But having a lot of upside makes a world of difference.
Yeah, it really does for here. And for you, when the World War I Museum came to you originally, for me, and I've read your bio and I know your background, for you it had to be full circle.
Yeah.
Granddad,
Sure.
Dad.
Right.
Explain that part of.
Well, first and foremost, World War I is a defining narrative in the Australian story. The people will remember that Gallipoli for Australians is really significant. It's interesting that Australia chooses a loss as its defining national story, quite unlike the United States, who would never.
Yeah, they just shoved it out of the history book. We've never lost anything.
That's right. It'd only ever be a win. But for the Australian story, it was so consuming for the Australians. About 40% of service-aged men in Australia were shipped off to Europe to serve, and 65% casualty rate. It affected every home in every street, in every neighbourhood in the country. So it had a profound impact. And of course, fighting for the empire, in a land that they're unfamiliar with. So, it's nation-defining. And from about August of 14, so just as the war began, the Japanese Navy, in fact, escorted Australians for the most part to Europe. And for my grandfather, he was British and he served for a period of time. I have some letters of his. He complains a lot about the food.
Right.
He didn't like.
And the letters, by the way, folks, are from 1917.
Yeah, right. So he didn't like the cleanliness of the houses, the animals that were seemingly too close to people's homes, and then my father served for a long time in World War II, and was in reconnaissance. I've got I come from a legacy family of service. I myself did not serve, but I'm really honoured to be at the U.S. National Museum that seeks to preserve the story of those who served in World War I. And at the museum where people would say to me sometimes, it's sort of weird, Matt, that an Australian, a ring-in, an immigrant would be providing leadership at a national museum. And given the focus of the museum as an international storyteller, in many respects, it makes sense. Why not?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
especially of how much Australia had to give at that time, and even the British Empire, and then eventually the United States got in as well. And the thing about the museum as well, and your father was a British Royal Tank. He was in a British Royal Tank, and both your grandfather and your father saw horrible things.
Yeah.
And we just talked about the United States never really has lost a war, ever, according to them. But the deal is, with the museum, and I think this is the most poignant thing for me, and that you point out the museum, there's an infamous saying, war is hell.
Right.
And at the museum, I think the first thing you realize when you see the poppy field and you realize what each poppy represents, you just go, there's a lot of honor because of the people who died for their countries, but you use the other H word, which is horror.
Right.
It's just honor and horror, and there's no rah-rah here.
Right.
You are showing them exactly what it was like during that period of time, which I think is tremendous.
Yeah. Now, forebears who, the museum opened in 1926 in its original form. That was an exhibit hall and memory hall.
Right.
And then in the late 80s, 90s, things went downhill and the place was
just
closed.
like Union Station
Yeah,
across the
right.
street a
Yeah,
lot.
exactly. Not uncommon for civic buildings.
Right.
There was lack of investment and so forth. And so the question was, what do we do? Do we knock it down? Do we renovate it? And the people rallied around and said, let's have a 18-month sales tax, self-imposed, passed by 68% of the voters, and private philanthropy raised, and those two together and some federal and state grants raised about $110 million and restored the memorial.
Mm-hmm.
And then in its understructure built this extraordinary museum, which was worthy of its collection. It had been collecting since 1920, the second oldest collecting institution in the world. And it was encyclopedic, sought to be collecting from all of the countries that were involved. And our forebears, those who were involved in the planning in those years, chose one of the foremost museum exhibit designers in the world, Ralph Applebaum Associates. So more recently, they designed the exhibits in the National African American Museum of Culture. It's a Smithsonian. And they also recently did the World War II galleries at the Imperial War Museum in London, the NASCAR Hall of Fame, other things. And they did us. So they chose somebody who's the very best. And as you've said, they designed our storytelling in a chronological way, so it unpacks a complicated story and presents it in a way which is really digestible and speaks of the courage and honor of those who served and also confesses war's horror. And we've got to hold those two things in tension with each other.
Mm-hmm.
I think that they've done a remarkable job, and the galleries have really stood the test of time. Up until COVID, the TripAdvisor would rank museums across the country in 35,000, and we were in the top 25 for many years. They don't rank them at the moment. I think during COVID they backed off that. But that's a real honor for the people of Kansas City. This is not a project of mine. It's a project of the people of Kansas City. And so it speaks to the quality and you'd expect to find a museum like this in DC or in London, perhaps in Paris, Sydney, perhaps. But it's here in Kansas City. And, that speaks to the foresight of our forebears in the 1920s and then again in the 1990s and early 2000s. We're undertaking a really significant renovation at the moment in our main galleries and our lower level, and that's going to take what is already one of the world's best museums, ensure that it retains that place, but really propels it, and we're very excited about what that's going to mean.
It is considered the best in the entire world for World War I.
Yeah.
Which is, it's right here in Kansas City. Sometimes it's what the people in Kansas City miss because you can't see the forest for the trees.
Yeah, right.
You see these places, Union Station, all the things they've done. You at the World War I Museum. We talked about the Nelson Atkins.
Yeah.
Just, folks, you live in this terrific area. Just enjoy it, embrace it, and visit.
Yeah.
It's important.
And what's cool about this museum is that there's something in there pretty much for everyone. A lot of people come because they have an interest in military history.
Right.
But the storytelling that we do is much bigger than just that. It was defining for the world, this horrendous conflict, and it was defining for the United States. So what we find is that people who have an interest in military history, they love it, and everybody else does too. For example, the other day, I like to go and wander around a bit each day, and there was a woman there, and I stopped her in the hall and I said, "So, how have you enjoyed your visit?" She said, "It's so fantastic." I said, "Are you from out of town?" "Yes, I am." Incidentally, about 65% of our visitors are from outside of the region.
Right.
People come in from other countries and from other parts of the United States. 65% do to Kansas City to see this museum.
Right.
And she said, "Yeah, we're from Nebraska. And our 14-year-old son, for his birthday, wanted to come to this museum.
Oh, wow.
That's his birthday present. So we're all here, the whole family, and it is the very best thing we could have done." And I said, "But how's it been for your son?" She said, "He's absolutely loving it." Then he came across and said, "What a fabulous experience." That warmed my heart. When you're the parent of an adolescent, you've got two roles: to be a wallet and an idiot. And here's
I'm going to remember that.
yeah.
Okay.
So here's a mum who's got a 14-year-old that brings its own challenges, and here they are on their birthday, and he wants to come to a museum. Isn't that fabulous?
Wow.
And the family have this wonderful experience together, and they're learning. It's totally cool. That story's repeated over and over, and we're really proud to be the stewards of that.
Yeah, I'll bet. And that's good parenting, number one.
Yeah.
Number two, it's good education. Wherever
totally.
in Nebraska he was getting his education, his historical education, it was spot on.
Yeah.
That was great that somebody did. Because normally you can't tear a kid away from his screen
Yeah,
at
exactly
that point.
true.
Or he's in the museum the whole time trying to use his phone or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, and we just a couple of months ago opened now the Bergman Family Galleries.
Yes, we know
which
the
is
Bergmans very
good
well.
Deal, wonderful family on the lower level. And what we did there is we created a new open storage. So this is, we have about 350,000 objects that are stored in this very secure, climate-controlled area of the museum. So only about 6% of the collection is available for people to see. We wanted to create storage that was still storage, still climate controlled, still secure, but behind glass. And so we created this area. It's about 190-foot coastline, as it were, like a shop front, and 4 shelves, so that's about 800 linear feet, and then brought about 1,550 objects out from storage and just have a whole lot of stuff. So it doesn't have labels. It's just lots of stuff.
From that period of time and from that war.
Exactly. All beautifully lit. It's fantastic. So audiences or guests are really enjoying going to this area, as well as, of course, all the other galleries. But this open storage, they'll see things that they would never otherwise see in any museum ever. And then it's very cool. Then we also renovated a learning centre and a research centre on that area. Then the Ellis Gallery is the final piece there. At the moment, we have this wonderful installation, and they are letters between a serviceman, his name's Walter, and his mum and dad. And his dad is an illustrator professionally. So every envelope his dad illustrated with something related to what his son Walter was doing. Mm-hmm. And so we have about 50 of these letters and envelopes on the wall framed. Absolutely fabulous. So fun. One of the letters, Walter asks his father to stop illustrating the envelopes because his mail is being stolen, because the other servicemen love so much what his dad is doing. It's a very cool thing. So that's been in our archive for years. We bring it out, then people are able to see a very intimate and personal part of the story of the war. The war is about people.
Oh, yeah.
It's about people who served their stories. And so us being able to bring, more objects out is fabulous. Well, in that particular collection of objects in open storage in the Bergman Family Gallery, for me, the most moving piece is a small piece of fabric about 12 inches by 12 inches where a mum has embroidered a blue star. So the blue star is in the middle of that, and so that indicates that her son was injured in service. And then she has embroidered over the top of that with gold thread because he died.
He died.
Yeah. And that's a really intimate, personal piece that we will keep and preserve forever.
Oh, yeah.
It tells the one person's story of millions who experienced that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing that you brought up before about the countries, this blew me away when I read it, 116 countries were involved in World War I. 116 different countries were involved in World War I, which just blows your mind.
It is. It's phenomenal, isn't it? So every inhabited continent of the globe was pulled into the war. And because of the empires, now if it was in today's terms, it would be the equivalent of 116 countries. Yeah, so it's sort of hard to wrap your head around, isn't it? Yeah, and of course, at a scale of conflict which the world had never previously experienced.
Right. How often do you change? So you have the artifacts back in your safe, secure room, and then the other behind the glass. How often do you bring things out and change things up a little bit? Some of the things you probably can't change because, like the like the trenches and the tanks and everything else that you have down there. Yeah.
So we've got two changing galleries, the Wiley Gallery and Exhibit Hall. And so about every 6 months to 9 months, we have different installations in those areas. So in Exhibit Hall at the moment, to coincide with the NFL draft, we have an exhibition called Entertaining the Troops. As you said earlier, it said that war is months of sheer boredom interrupted by moments of utter terror.
Yeah.
And so what did they do to keep the troops entertained? And so this exhibit talks about that with all primary source, all objects of the museums. And then in the Wiley Gallery, we have an exhibition called Bespoke Bodies, and it's about the development of prostheses, prosthetics, artificial, noses, eyes, hands, legs, feet, so forth, from World War I through till today. So about every 6 to 9 months, in our main galleries, that's our permanent installation that just tells the story in a chronological way. Right. We occasionally change objects in that area, but what we're currently doing over the next 2 years is a major multi-million-dollar improvement to those main galleries, where we are introducing a lot of new interactives, where you mentioned the trenches. The trenches are one of those defining things about World War I. In fact, it's true of the Russia-Ukraine war as well.
Right now,
trenches are similarly being used. We're completely rebuilding the trenches so that people get more access to them, able to see them better, introducing new elements in the exhibition that I think is going to be extraordinary. So about every 6 months, so this September and October were the first rollout of changes, and then thereafter about every 6 months through till 2026, where at the end of that refresh project, we're going to be opening a permanent installation memory hall that tells the story of the museum and memorial. People ask this question of us all the time: why is this here?
Exactly.
And so we want to be able to tell the Kansas City story of why the museum and memorial is there, how it was built, who built it.
Yeah, who funded it.
Right,
yeah.
Who funded it, 83,000 households.
That's right.
What some of the characters who were in the area, what they did in service and what their lives were afterwards, and then place it in a larger context. There were 10,000 memorials thereabouts established in the US. Lots of memorials across the globe were established. But at the scale of what you find here in Kansas City, for this to be a local initiative essentially is without parallel.
Right.
For it to be a memorial of scale with such architectural significance, and then a world-class museum, one of the world's best, that it's a local initiative. It's firstly unusual in the United States, but in other countries it's unheard of because they're federally or the state initiates those. That's not the case here. We want to tell that story as well. That's a Kansas City story. And so we want to be able to. So we're excited about these upgrades that we'll be doing. It'll make what's already a great museum. It'll ensure that the people of Kansas City, when their friends come to town in 5 years' time, their first stop, they'll want to go to the National World War I Museum and Memorial.
Yeah, I don't want to say this, but geez, that sort of lines up with a soccer tournament going to Kansas
That's right.
City.
And of
just
course,
about the same time.
It is, and it's our 100th year since the
Sure,
museum was, since the memorial was
Right.
dedicated in 1926 by President Calvin Coolidge. And then, of course, it's the 250th anniversary of the United States.
Yes.
So there's fabulous alignment. World Cup, we'll be able to also tell the story of the Christmas truce of 1914, where they played soccer.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll be celebrating the commitment of the people of Kansas City in establishing the memorial and their commitment to veterans.
Right.
And then, of course, the United States' 250th birthday.
Right. Here's the biggest question I get asked. And if you think about it, okay, you go up there and you see the memorial and everybody that has never been here will go up and walk up and say, well, is that it? I said, no, the museum's down there. Why did it end up underneath like normally you would think it would be like a big building, almost like the Union Station sitting out there, or a museum sitting out there, a giant edifice of some kind. What was the thinking behind underground right underneath the memorial?
Yeah. The memorial is registered with the National Trust.
Right.
So it's a heritage site. All the glory of the name, no money, but that means that there are constraints on what we're able to do. The constraints are pretty significant. So therefore, we couldn't do anything on the courtyard or on the memorial itself.
Okay.
But there was space underneath, and so that's what the idea of then.
You couldn't have built out onto the promenade. Could have you built out
Possibly so.
south?
So, for example, on the southwest side,
Right.
maybe build something down there. I think that the part of the idea was that when they had, the foundation of the tower was compromised. And so when they were excavating, then said, well, it seems to us that there's an opportunity to establish a museum. So I just think it made sense to do that. And also, it's a little bit like a bunker. Going in the bronze doors is something like almost going into a trench of
Right.
sorts.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's a bit of a parallel. An upside of the location of the museum is that it doesn't impede the view shed at all. And, even the placement of signs has been an issue through the years because it interrupts the view shed. The signs that says that it's, for parking and so forth. So we're always having to be sensitive to that, but at the same time, letting people know that there's this world-class museum and, come on in. So signage, we work hard to draw people to that place.
Yeah, right. It's very unassuming. I think now the tower is magnificent, but the museum you go in, it's very unassuming at that point. And I think that ends up getting the point across about honor and horror.
Yeah, right.
So we're bringing you. It's almost like we're bringing you downstairs to show you exactly what this was like.
And you mentioned the poppy field. As you go through the bronze doors, you then, to proceed into the main galleries, you cross a glass bridge, the Paul Sunderland glass bridge, under which there are 9,000 poppy blooms, each representing 1,000 combatant deaths. So it's beautiful and it's horrific at the same time.
Yeah, it is. When you think about what they represent.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's skylight, and you can look up and see the memorial. And we all know that at night time it's lit so beautifully, so it's just, most spectacular. And the most iconic views of Kansas City typically are taken from the memorial courtyard.
Yeah. So you've been here now in the United States for 20 years. You are a United States citizen, obviously. You've been the curator here and the president and CEO, and I'll call you curator because it is love that you do this for. You have your background with your grandfather and your father, I think, means a lot to you. How much longer do you think you'd like to continue on being the president and CEO?
Yeah.
I'm sure other people pull at you a little bit. You're getting pulled.
We were fortunate that I shouldn't say fortunate. The last numbers of years, from the period of 2014 to 2019 was the 100th anniversary of the war. During that time, I worked with the board and the staff to say, who are we after the commemorative period?
Right.
And we developed what we call now our 3 big ideas, which then they were adopted by the board in 2019. And then, thank goodness that we had them. They guided us during the COVID period, and now they give us real clarity about our future. They absolutely drive me, and I feel absolutely committed to those. I feel we have as much enthusiasm and a sense of importance in our role now, even more than we had during the commemoration, where there's this natural focus around 100 years.
Right.
So that really energizes me. So I feel very committed to the mission of the Museum and Memorial and to its future. The future is very bright. Our work is very important, and so I'm excited to stay as long as I can. One of the truths of working for a board, which I have pretty much most of my career, is that you want to make sure that you leave when they still love you and at the time of your own choosing, because both of those things are going to change.
Yeah, right.
But I'm fortunate that we have a wonderful board, and we're very much aligned in the staff, and myself and the board are very much aligned with what we see as our strategic focus, the importance of our mission. So I'm excited to have no other plans than to remain.
Yeah, okay. Well, that is very good news. Yeah, you don't want to have the brown envelope dropped on you.
That's
Just
right.
say, You want to read that over and take it or leave it. Just, you know what I mean? We love you, but we'll
That's
see
right.
you. Don't let the door hit you on the
That's
way,
right.
on the way out the door. That's the last thing you want to do. And I think the people in Kansas City should understand that this was way back in 1918. Let's do something.
Sure.
Let's do something before this was even.
That's right.
It was just a baby dream.
Yeah.
The people of Kansas City, you said 20, how many thousand households?
The business leaders came together just after the armistice in 18. So it's in the latter part of 18. And then a fundraising campaign in 19. Right. 83,000 people contributed to that. So
this is just normal citizens contributing.
That's right.
Yes.
So arguably that's 83,000 households. There's only 250,000 people in the city at the time. So maybe there's the surrounding areas, but that's huge. And then a lot of enthusiasm about the idea that they would create a memorial to honor the war dead, and then to also create a tribute for peace. Remember, in those days, it was sort of thought, well, it's over. It's over. That's right. And then the 5 Allied commanders. So that's from Belgium, France, Italy, the United Kingdom, and the US. Those 5 came together with Vice President Coolidge in 21, and they dedicated the land. About 100,000 people came out. So, it's a bigger show in town.
Wow.
People come out. They're very enthusiastic about this. And then a national competition for architects selected, and then this fantastic edifice was built. Right. And then in 26, about 150,000 people came out, and President Coolidge was here then to dedicate the memorial. And there are people who will tell me about they were here as they're very old now, or their mother or father were here as children during the dedication in 26.
Right. And then the other thing is when it started to deteriorate and instead of just letting it go, and I think there's something else that people here should be extremely proud of us. So letting go, just like Union Station, they rallied around it. Right. They said, how can we fund it? We do not want to let this go, leave our culture here in Kansas City. So they turned around and did it again.
That's right. And then renovated and built this. And then, more than that, we are the gathering place of Kansas City, a 47-acre park there. And then when something happens, that's where we go.
Sure.
When, for protests as well as for celebrations, for family picnics, for school photographs, for wedding photographs, or show off to your friends.
School visits.
Exactly right. So at that time also, there were improvements made to the grounds. The trees were cleared out. There was lighting put in. So now it's a tremendously secure place, and that at all hours of the night, there are people there on the grounds, and there's people there in the courtyard. And when there's important events in people's lives, they go there and participate in whatever they're doing. The other day I came out of maybe last year I came out of my office going to my car, and there was an older woman running the stairs. Lots of people excising.
Yes, when I was there that day, I was over there for 8:10, and you were gearing up for a big event. I saw lots of people running the stairs.
So she tells me she's 84. She's training for a marathon in Hawaii. I thought that is fantastic. We're so glad to that you're
use
training
us any
here.
way you want.
Indeed, fabulous. So people use the grounds for all sorts of things, and we absolutely welcome that.
Right, and it is their grounds.
That's exactly
it's
right. This
really
is the people's park.
And their heritage.
It is.
Absolutely.
We're the Central Park of Kansas City, and
that's a great way to look at it.
Kansas City's front porch. We want people using these grounds, and people come and protest on these grounds as well. It's a free speech place, and our view is we don't decide who protests. You're welcome to come and protest. Now you need to complete a form so that we can make sure that that things are all sweet. But we don't decide who and why, because we believe that the values for which our forebears fought in World War I are to support liberty, democracy, freedom, and that means that people are going to be protesting, are going to be expressing, their points of view, are going to be arguing the case. And so what better place to do that than on the grounds of the Museum and Memorial?
Right, and I have all my mean streak friends back on the East Coast. So it's because where you live. That's why you're so mean all the time. And during the draft, especially, sometimes with the parades, people from other part of the country just go, okay, fine, a parade, we'll just
Sure.
go, whatever. But when it came to the draft,
Yeah.
everybody in the world, was watching the draft. And they just came back to me and said, I can't believe the way you changed the colors for the teams that were being drafted. And you the tower was lit, and then poppies. What were the poppies? And I said, that's the World War I Museum, and they represent, every poppy there represents 1,000 people who died during World War I. They said, God, that place just. I said, hey, there's just something about Kansas City, guys. I've been telling you for years.
Yeah, what a wonderful moment that was for Kansas City.
Oh, it was.
We were honoured to be one of the host sites, and that 90% of the activities were on the grounds, and that then as each of those picks were made, that the cameras would turn around, and as you say, the logos would be on either side of the frieze, not on the frieze itself, and then the colours on the frieze, and then in the evenings we did the Horizons poppy installation on the tower. Just really quite fabulous for Kansas City, and for the work of the museum, it was significant because there were millions upon millions of people watching, and we're the only city in the world that has a museum like this, and in the United States, absolutely the only one. And so it'll be a draw for people downstream. There'll be a long tail that comes from the draft of people.
Because they'll want to go stand where this happened and say, hey, I remember our first one. It was right there.
Yeah.
Where, the big facade in front of Union Station and then the backdrop with
exactly
with
right.
World War I.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. So I guess you get along with George Costello. Okay?
Yeah, all our neighbours. You bet. We're thrilled. We have the Fed on one side, and then we've got the RS, and then we've got Crown Centre and our friends there, and then of course Union Station. And so we all share in different ways with each other, and all get along very well. And of course, we're excited about the streetcar coming up the hill.
Yes.
Someone asked me the other day, so what's the impact of the streetcar, extending from Union Station? I said, well, the biggest impact is I'm going to see when people come from the streetcar, they won't be having just walking up the hill.
Yeah.
They'll be able to get off at Memorial Drive and just come right around.
Yeah, that was fantastic. I can't thank you enough for coming in and sharing this experience. I'm blown away by the museum, always have been. Took my father-in-law in there. He was in tears. Great place.
Yeah, well, it's one of those important gems of the city, and it's the people's place. It's their museum. Our grounds are the other people's. We're just stewards of that, but we take it seriously, and we think that we have an important international role to play. On the Great Frieze. Our forebears carved this fabulous bas relief and these words above it saying part that let us create a just and lasting peace amongst ourselves and all nations. And I think the memorial honours those who served, but also points towards a period of peace and of equity and a prosperous future amongst ourselves and for everybody. And we take that seriously. We hope that we can help people be able to be a part of that sort of work by visiting the museum and the memorial and enjoying the grounds, bringing their friends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely visit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Matt Naylor, really appreciate the
you
president
bet.
and CEO of World War I Museum and Memorial. Just a fantastic tribute to not just you and the people who work with you, but all the people in Kansas City who make sure we preserve these wonderful places, because there's just something about Kansas City.
Yeah. No, fabulous.
Thanks, Tom.